In the shadow of the great smokestacks that rose like iron giants over Manchester in 1842, young Thomas Whitaker drew his first ragged breath of freedom. He was 14, thin as a rail, with soot-blackened hands that had already known the bite of the cotton mill's looms for 6 long years. Life in 19th century Europe was not the romantic haze of novels read by candlelight in distant drawing rooms. It was a brutal symphony of steam whistles, clattering machinery, and the endless grind of survival. Thomas's story began in a cramped back-to-back house on the edge of the River Irwell, where the water ran thick with dye and waste. His mother, a spinner who worked 14-hour shifts, had died of consumption the winter before, her lungs shredded by the same cotton dust that filled their tiny room. His father, a weaver turned beggar after the power looms stole his trade, drank gin to forget. The family's only luxury was the single tallow candle that flickered each night, while Thomas taught himself letters from a stolen primer. "Knowledge is the only escape," his mother had whispered before the fever took her. In Europe of the 1800s, that escape was rare. The city itself was a marvel and a monster. Factories belched black plumes that turned day into twilight. Children no older than Thomas darted between carts, scavenging coal scraps or running errands for a ha'penny. The air smelled of sulfur, damp wool, and unwashed bodies. By Stevenson, powered trains that now linked London to Liverpool in hours, not days. Iron bridges spanned rivers that once took weeks to cross by barge. Cotton from American plantations flooded the mills, clothing half the world and making Manchester the richest, filthiest city on earth. Thomas's turning point came on a rain-lashed October morning. The mill owner, Mr. Hargreaves, a man whose side whiskers were as stiff as his heart, announced a new machine, a self-acting mule that could spin twice as fast with half the workers. Half the children were to be turned out. Thomas was one of them. With nothing but the clothes on his back and a small bundle containing his mother's thimble and the primer, he joined the flood of the displaced. Europe was full of such wanderers.
From the Irish potato fields to the German principalities, from French vineyards to Polish shtetls, people moved like leaves in a storm. He walked south, following the new railway tracks that sliced through the green Pennines. At night, he slept in haylofts or under bridges, sharing stories with fellow vagrants. One was a Scottish engineer named MacGregor, who had helped build the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1830, the world's first passenger line. "Steam is the future, laddie," MacGregor said, his breath fogging in the cold. "But it'll chew up the poor before it lifts them." He taught Thomas how to read timetables and the basics of mechanics. In return, Thomas shared his last crust of bread. By Christmas, Thomas reached Birmingham, the workshop of the world. Here the air rang with hammers, forging everything from buttons to cannons. He found work in a small foundry owned by a Quaker family who still believed in the dignity of labour. The pay was better, 9 shillings a week, but the hours were merciless. Days blurred into nights under the glow of molten iron.
Yet Birmingham offered something Manchester never had. Evenings at the Mechanics' Institute, where working men gathered to debate politics and science. Thomas devoured lectures on electricity, geology, and the rights of man. He heard whispers of Chartism, the great movement demanding votes for all men, not just the rich. In 1839 and 1842, petitions with millions of signatures had shaken Parliament. Europe was stirring. In France, the July Revolution of 1830 had toppled a king. Now the continent waited for the next spark. Spring 1845 brought fever and famine to Ireland, and the news spread like fire. Thomas's Irish friend, young Bridget O'Connell, arrived in Birmingham fleeing starvation. Her family had eaten grass and nettles before the coffin ships carried the survivors to Liverpool. Bridget's eyes held the green of distant hills that no longer fed her people. Together, they dreamed of something better. On Sundays, they walked the canals, where narrowboats painted in bright reds and yellows carried coal and dreams. Thomas showed her the new telegraph wires humming with messages across hundreds of miles. "The world is shrinking," he told her. One day we'll speak to Paris in seconds. But Europe was not only factories and hope. In the grand capitals, life glittered differently. Thomas saved enough for a third-class ticket to London in 1848, the year of revolutions. The city stunned him. Buckingham Palace rose white and proud. The new Houses of Parliament, still unfinished, gleamed with Gothic spires. Gas lamps lit the streets until midnight. Gentlemen in top hats and ladies in crinolines strolled Hyde Park, while street urchins sold matches for a farthing. The Great Exhibition of 1851 was still 3 years away, but already Crystal Palace plans were whispered in taverns. Thomas stood before the British Museum, gazing at Egyptian treasures looted from empires older than his own. He felt small, yet part of something vast. In London, he met revolutionaries. A German exile named Karl, short, bearded, fierce of eye, spoke in smoky coffee houses of a coming workers' uprising. "The bourgeoisie has forged the weapons that will slay it," Karl declared, his accent thick with Rhineland roots. Thomas listened, heart racing. Across the Channel, Paris was exploding. In February 1848, barricades rose again. King Louis-Philippe fled.
News arrived by telegraph. Vienna, Berlin, Milan, all aflame. Even the sleepy Italian states dreamed of unity. Thomas felt the tremor in his bones. Europe was no longer a patchwork of kings and peasants. It was a continent waking. He never joined the barricades. Instead, fate pulled him across the sea. Bridget's uncle in Paris needed a mechanic for a new steam-powered printing press. In the summer of 1848, they crossed the Channel on a paddle steamer, the salty wind tasting of freedom. Paris in 1848 was a city of contrasts, the wide boulevards of Baron Haussmann's future dreams already being sketched, yet the narrow streets of the old quarters still stank of revolution and sewage. Cafes buzzed with poets and plotters. Thomas found work in a workshop near the Seine, repairing the very machines that printed revolutionary pamphlets. He learned French from street vendors and fell in love with the language of light. Life in Paris was sweeter than Manchester's soot. Bread was cheap and wine cheaper. On Bastille Day, they danced in the streets while the National Guard watched warily. Yet shadows lingered. The June Days uprising crushed the workers' dreams and blood.
Thomas saw friends dragged to prison ships bound for Algeria. Bridget, now his wife in all but law, sewed uniforms for the New Republic by day and read Victor Hugo's latest verses by night. "Les Miserables is coming," she whispered, though the book was still years away. They lived in a garret overlooking the rooftops, where chimney pots smoked like miniature factories. The 1850s brought the Second Empire under Napoleon III. Paris transformed into a city of light, literally. Gas lamps multiplied, sewers were built, parks opened. Thomas helped install steam engines in the new omnibuses that clattered along the boulevards. Wages rose. He and Bridget rented 2 rooms and even bought a small piano. Their son, little Emile, was born in 1853, his first cry drowned by the roar of a passing train on the new Gare du Nord. Europe was racing forward. Railways snaked from Madrid to Moscow. Telegraphs linked London to Calcutta. The Crimean War, 1853-56, proved steamships and railways could move armies faster than ever. Thomas read newspapers aloud to Bridget, marveling at photographs, the new miracle from France that captured faces forever. Yet prosperity was fragile.
In 1860, a cholera outbreak swept Paris. Emile survived, Bridget did not. Thomas buried her in Père Lachaise under a simple stone carved with a thimble and a steam wheel. Grief nearly broke him, but Emile's small hand in his kept him moving. He took the boy back to England in 1865, the year the American Civil War ended and cotton mills roared again. Manchester had changed, cleaner factories, shorter hours thanks to the 10 Hours Act. Thomas opened a small repair shop near the new town hall. He taught evening classes at the Mechanics Institute, passing on the knowledge that had saved him. By 1870, Europe stood on the brink once more. Prussia crushed France in the Franco-Prussian War. The German Empire was proclaimed in Versailles' Hall of Mirrors. Thomas watched from afar, repairing engines for the expanding railway. His son Emile, now 17, dreamed of becoming an engineer like Stephenson. Together, they traveled to the 1878 Paris Exposition, where electric lights dazzled millions and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone spoke across rooms. Thomas, gray at the temples, stood beneath the rising Eiffel Tower skeleton and felt the century's pulse.
In his final years, Thomas wrote a small memoir he never published. "We lived between two worlds," he scrawled by gaslight. "The old Europe of kings and horses died in the smoke of our factories. The new one, of steel and speed, of votes and voices, was born in our calloused hands. It was cruel, beautiful, and ours." He died in 1898, the same year the first motor cars chugged through London streets. Emile buried him beside Bridget's empty grave in Manchester, placing a small brass steam whistle on the stone. Across Europe, from the factories of the Ruhr to the vineyards of Bordeaux, from the tenements of Vienna to the palaces of St. Petersburg, millions like Thomas had shaped the age. They had built the railways that united nations, the machines that clothed the world, the ideas that toppled thrones. Life in the 1800s was not gentle. It was a forge, hot, dangerous, relentless. Yet from its flames rose the modern world. And somewhere, in the quiet archives of forgotten libraries, the story of an ordinary boy who crossed continents on steam and hope still whispers to those who listen.